Welcome everyone to Master Coaches. Today, joining Bob Bertucci and Mick Haley and myself, Bill Walton, is Tom Hilbert and Jim Stone. Today we're going to talk about, hello boys, today we're talking about NCAA Volleyball Division I. And we're going to be discussing the conferences and each conference's opportunities to enter the NCAA Tournament after Thanksgiving, about 3 weeks away. So to kick the show off, our resident NCAA tracker and point scoring guru, Mr. Mick Haley.
Well, thanks, Bill. I don't know who's crawling under the desk, but I can hear all these noises, so I hope it's not distracting. I think Bob is trying to get out of what box he's in, but I can't figure out what's going on. Anyway, today is pretty interesting because we're going to try to track the possibility of what 64 teams are going to make it into the NCAA tournament. We have some guys that have participated in this event for many, many years and have gone through this with their teams and the committee and that sort of thing. So we're going to go around and take all the conferences and give an overview of the conferences first. I got elected to start, and I've got 6 conferences. I've got 3 conferences that are going to get one team. And I'm pretty sure about that. The Southland Conference, the SWAC Conference, and the SoCon Conference. Let's start with the Southland. It looks to me like Southeastern, and they like to be called Southeastern. They're Southeastern Louisiana, so you know where they're from. At 24-4 is one of the teams that could come out of that conference. They've lost a couple games. They were undefeated for the longest time. They've lost a couple games in conference. So they could get upset in the conference tournament. But at this point, if Southeastern gets out, watch out for that team. That team is one of the best coached teams in the country. You won't believe how they are resilient. I had the wonderful opportunity of getting a chance to watch them play at Texas State, where they beat Texas State and played the other teams really close. In fact, I think they won 2 of the 3 matches down there. So that team, they are followed by Houston Christian and Corpus Christi and McNeese. Those are the 4 teams in that conference that I think you want to watch. And I would pick Southeastern coming out of that. In the SWAC, we have Alabama State, Florida A&M, Jackson State, and Prairie A&M. And honestly, I can't pick a team there. It's going to be one of those 4 if I'm correct. So I would look for one to get the bid out of there. Nobody else is close. Almost all the records are 15-12, 15-13, 14-10, and 16-12. So nobody has moved ahead there. And in the Southern Conference, the SoCon, Citadel was undefeated until a couple of weeks ago. They have a 24-2. That's my pick to come out of there. But Wolford, Mercer, Furman, all are teams that could do some damage, followed by Samford and Chattanooga. But I really think Citadel will come out. That's another team you don't want to play. They have arms, and they're scoring at about 18 points plus per set. So they're really hitting the ball well. So those are the 3 1-and-out schools. Now let's look at some bigger conference schools. One that I think is going to surprise everybody is the Sun Belt. I picked them to get 2 teams, but they actually are in line to get 3 teams possibly. The Sun Belt has 2 divisions and has a tournament. James Madison is rated really high, somewhere in the 20s. They are not in first place in their division. Coastal Carolina is ranked 69. South Alabama also is in the Western Conference. They're ranked 59. Texas State is ranked 36. So this weekend, Coastal Carolina plays Texas State twice. If they can beat Texas State, they'll ruin Texas State's chances maybe, but they'll move up significantly. James Madison looks like a lock at 21. If they don't win the conference and somebody else wins the conference, both of those teams should get in. And if James Madison or Texas State, who's now at 36, can maintain their positions, and another team like Coastal wins the conference or South Alabama, they actually could get 3 teams. That would really give the committee some serious problems. But right now, watch any of those 4 teams. Georgia Southern's on the outside playing very well, and Troy also. But I pick the winner, the one team coming out, followed by the second, James Madison, Texas State, and either Coastal Carolina or South Alabama. That's an interesting one, and that's always been a one-team conference. So something to look out for there. The next conference that I have is the Big 12. The Big 12 is really an interesting conference. Texas has taken charge of that. They've got a 3 rating in most of the ratings. They're anywhere from 2 to 4, so they look like a top 4 team to host a regional right now. BYU is second in that conference with a 20-5 record. They're in. Kansas is 18-4, but just lost one of their left sides, the transfer from Texas Tech. So they still have 3 left sides that they can start. So they still have firepower, but they might not be as strong as they would have been. Houston is around 4th with a 24 ranking in the RPI with a 14-7. Baylor is 5th with a 14-9. Iowa State with 16-7 is 6th at 39, and on the bubble is TCU. TCU is 13-12, needs a winning record, I think. Plus, they get 54 ranking. They have to beat some people down the stretch. So I say the Big 12 has got 6 in for sure, and maybe could get 7. I don't think Kansas State, who's at 62, can move up. They have a 13-10 record. And UCF at 63 has a 17-7 record. I don't think either of those two can get close enough unless they beat some teams here in the stretch. So I give the Big 12 6 or 7 teams. The one that's going to cause everybody to have heart failure is the SEC. The SEC is going to get 8 teams. And maybe, I don't think they can get 9, but you never know here at the end of the season. Arkansas is first, or Tennessee is first with a ranking of 8. Arkansas 9, Kentucky 12, Florida 15, Auburn 22, A&M, Texas A&M 28. Missouri, who has quietly moved up, is 15-9, and they're actually ahead of Georgia, the number 8 team. And there are some significant matches this week. Tennessee plays Georgia. If Georgia were to beat Tennessee, that would certainly move Tennessee down a little bit, but that would really help Georgia moving up. Also, Kentucky plays Auburn in the SEC. That's another massive opportunity for Auburn to move up in the SEC. And so I think the SEC gets 8 teams, if I'm not mistaken there. So knowing that, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jim Stone, analyst from the Colorado region, former Ohio State coach. Take it away, Jim.
Okay, well, the conferences I was focusing on were 2 Power 5 conferences, the Pac-12 and the Big 10, and then the mid-major conferences of the Metro Atlantic, the Ohio Valley, the Horizon, the Mid-American Conference, and lastly, the Summit Conference. And if there was strictly from a Midwestern perspective, if there was a year that some of these mid-majors could have gotten multiple teams in, this was probably going to be the year to do that, because the Big Ten, relatively speaking, hasn't performed as they normally do in terms of their RPI ranking and on-court results. So we'll leave the Big Ten and Pac-12 to last, but the mid-majors, the Summit League is a dogfight right now. They have a conference tournament. I can't see anybody, anybody other than the winner of the conference tournament getting in. Right now they have Omaha, Denver, Missouri, Kansas City, South Dakota, and North Dakota State, all with 3 or 4 losses. So I don't see that pecking order per se changing a lot. So going into the conference tournament, that's going to be a relative dogfight. But the highest RPI coming out of that conference is 133 with Omaha. So I'm not sure whomever wins it will get in for sure, obviously, but I can't see 2 or 3 teams getting in from the Summit. Horizon League, somewhat of the same tale. They also have a tournament. Wright State is leading right now with an RPI of 88, leading the conference. UW Milwaukee is in second place, and they have an RPI of 111. So kind of the same scenario. Whoever wins the conference tournament will be the automatic qualifier. Second place, I can't see getting in. Ohio Valley has Eastern Illinois and Southeast Missouri way in front. And actually, they're tied for the lead for the conference lead at 12-2. Eastern has the highest RPI at 75. So the winner will get in. Second place, probably not so much. Excuse me. The Metro Atlantic, you have Fairfield and Quinnipiac, teams number 1 and 2. Fairfield with an RPI of 148. So that's going to be winner gets in and everybody else goes home. I have Ohio Valley, which is, I mentioned the Ohio Valley. So it'll be Mid-America Conference. And this is of the mid-majors that I was looking at, this is the only conference that could possibly get 2 teams in. You have Western Michigan, which I think is undefeated right now. They have a conference tournament. So if Western Michigan gets in, automatic qualifier, they have an RPI of 36, which is fantastic. Whomever, if Western Michigan is upset, I think they'll still get in as an at-large with that high of an RPI. The other teams that are trailing Western Michigan, at least via the conference standings, have RPIs of 70 and up. So it might be a stretch for anybody other than Western to get in if Western wins the tournament. Now, the last 2 conferences are Power 5 conferences. The Pac-12 has had a great year, and we'll talk more about the number of teams that will get in. Pac-12 does not have a conference tournament. Stanford's at 2, Oregon's at 11. I'm talking RPIs now. Arizona State 12, Washington State 15, USC 28, Washington 40, UCLA 45. So those teams I think are pretty much assured, but it'll be interesting because Cal is at 60, Colorado's at 64, and all those middle of the pack teams play each other here in the upcoming weeks. So those are going to be pretty big matches, especially for Cal and Colorado. They have to find a way to beat some of those teams that are above them. The Big Ten, as I mentioned earlier, from my perspective, it hasn't been a great year for the Big Ten. The top 50 teams RPI, there's only 5 teams in the conference that are ranked at some point in the top 50. So again, they do not have a conference tournament. So you have Nebraska, Wisconsin at 1 and 4 RPI, Penn State, Purdue at 24 and 26. I think those teams are probably getting in. Minnesota is at 39. And then after that, there's nobody above 60 RPI. So for those teams, Michigan State, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, to make a move, they're going to have to win all their matches, or certainly most of their matches, against their competitors in the middle of the conference type of framework. And we'll see what happens. But I think the Big Ten, I think they're going to get in 4, and after that, it's a roll of the dice. Minnesota, even though they're ranked 39 right now, from my observation, they're not playing at a level that doesn't preclude some of these other teams beating them coming down the stretch here. So it'll be interesting. As I mentioned, so kind of as a summary, the mid-majors, probably just 1 team will get in, with the exception of maybe the Mid-America Conference, and then we can focus on the Pac-12 and Big Ten later in the discussion. So I think next is Billy Walton.
Billy.
All right, Billy.
Only my mama calls me Billy.
And me.
and Jim Stone. There's we're going to start with the Big South, and the Big South. The top two teams in the Big South are High Point and Winthrop, and they have a tourney in the Big South, which means their automatic qualifier comes out of the tournament. High Point is the host. High Point's RPI is I used KPI since the committee's using KPI. High Point's KPI is 62, and Winthrop, who is 11-2 in the conference, their RPI is 207. So you can see from this conference that it's a one-team conference. Whoever wins the tourney is in, and no at-larges coming out of that conference. A-Sun, they also have a tourney. Top two teams who should be vying at the conference tournament are Florida Gulf Coast, who's 14-0 in the conference with a 56 KPI, and Lipscomb, who's 12-2 in the conference, and they're sitting at 98. So again, we've got another conference that the conference champion is going, and they don't have a high enough RPI for a second. If the favorite gets upset, there's no chance for them RPI-wise to get into the tournament. The Colonial Athletic Association also has a conference tournament. There's two teams that are in the hunt and are doing pretty well. Delaware and Townsend, 13-3 and 14-2. Townsend is the host for the conference tournament, so home team always has the advantage. But Campbell's had a struggle early in the year, but Campbell's playing pretty good in conference at 11-5. So whoever wins that conference tournament will be the representative to the NCAA tournament, and there will be no at-large teams out of that conference. Next is Conference USA. They also have a tournament, but the leader in that conference, Western Kentucky, at 26-4, 14-0 in the conference with a 24 KPI. If somebody else wins that conference, Western Kentucky is automatically in. But right now, Western Kentucky hasn't had a lot of trouble. So unless they really get upset at Liberty, and Liberty's been known to be a good home team, and they have come out of that tournament before. So if Liberty were to win at home in the conference tournament, we'd get 2 out of Conference USA. And then to the American Athletic Conference, the conference I was in at the end, we've got SMU at 20, Rice at 46, and Wichita State at 57. They do not play a conference tournament. So whoever wins the regular season wins the American Athletic. And it looks like they could get 2, and maybe Wichita State can sneak in. SMU has Pepperdine on their second to last match of the year, which is a non-conference match. So somehow SMU thought they might need an RPI boost at the end of the year, but they're sitting at 20. So I think for sure AAC gets 1 in, but Rice has been in the tournament the last 4 or 5 years, and at 46, Rice has an outside chance to get in the tournament. My other conference that I want to talk about is the ACC, who has a number of highly ranked teams, but I'm going to save that for when we go back to the big conferences, and I'll lead off the big conference discussion at the end, and then we'll jump back into the Big Ten and the SEC. And with that, I turn you over to Bob, the man Bertucci.
Actually, Tom. I think it's Tom's turn.
Oh, it's mine? Okay. Well, I've got 5 conferences, none of whom are major, but they're all interesting because I'll tell you, like one of I'll start off with the Big West Conference. That was, I remember when they were getting 6 and 7 teams into the NCAA tournament before. They're probably going to be a 1-team league. They have a tourney for the first time, though, so that could make a big difference. But UCSB has sort of moved away from everybody in that tournament, and their RPI is sitting at 38. So if they were to get upset in their conference tournament, they could get 2 teams in. But otherwise, I think that's a 1-team league. And the second place team in that league right now is Long Beach State, who has a win over Texas. But they've had such this up and down season during conference, so they're sitting at 70 in the RPI, or 61 in the KPI. So their KPI is a little bit better, but I still don't think 61 is good enough to get them in as an at-large. And then Hawaii is at 67 KPI, or no, I'm sorry, 55 KPI, 67 RPI. So those are teams that have traditionally always gotten in the NCAA tournament, and I don't even think they're bubble teams at this point. I think they have to win that new Big West tournament in order to qualify. Cal Poly's done real well. And the other thing I want to mention about that league is, UC San Diego was not even a Division I team back before COVID. They've jumped up to 5th in that league with Rick Ludes. He's done a really nice job. And I think he's probably a team that could win that tournament. That'd be interesting for him to come out as a dark horse. The West Coast Conference, I think, is a very good conference. But again, you have Pepperdine, who they're in at 34. They do not have a conference tournament. Right behind them is Loyola Marymount. And I want to mention that Pepperdine has had, a win over Washington. They did lose to UCSB and University of Hawaii, but they did have some injury issues when they played that weekend. They've got this incredible player named Grace Killingsworth, who is an All-American level player. But they're undefeated in league right now, and they have Pacific left. They have San Diego left. San Diego has not had the season that they had last year. LMU I think, should be a bubble team. And it was interesting. They were sitting really in a pretty good, bubble level RPI. And then they had to play Portland and Gonzaga over last weekend, swept them, and their RPI dropped 8 points. So that's one of the risks that you have when you're in conferences that have teams that are losing a lot of games. So I think the West Coast Conference is interesting. I think certainly Pepperdine will get in. LMU has a outside chance. They've got a couple of big matches coming up. So then we move over to the Big Sky, which is a one-team league. I mean, the highest RPI in that league is Northern Colorado at 112 because they schedule very tough, and they're sitting at 3rd place, or actually 4th place. Sac State has pulled away and is winning that league. Weber State's in 2nd. Montana State, with the new coaching staff, has done very well. They're in 3rd, or they're actually tied with Northern Colorado. But that's a one-team league. They do have a tournament, and the tournament's in Greeley, Colorado. So that's going to give Northern Colorado, who's got a lot of experience with that tournament, I think kind of an advantage to jump out of that conference with the win and make the NCAA tournament. The Mountain West, my former conference, Utah State has done a really nice job scheduling. They have they have one conference loss. They've already won the regular season mathematically. Then it's a weird conference because then you have 3 teams tied for 2nd and 3 teams tied for 3rd. So any of those 6 teams could make it into the conference tournament. And there's a lot of good teams in that league who have the ability to beat Utah State, especially UNLV at home because the conference tournament is in Las Vegas. Colorado State, I think, has great talent. So that's going to be an interesting one. But I think Utah State really has a lot of motivation to win that thing because they're sitting at 17 in the KPI. 16 in the KPI, 15 in the RPI. And this Blue Penguin, whoever this person is, predicts they will finish 17th. If they finish in the top 16, they got a chance of hosting in the NCAA. So I know they're going to be motivated to try to go to Vegas and win that tournament. So, and then lastly, you have the WAC. And the WAC, it's constantly changing. It's hard to keep up with who's in that league. New Mexico State was a power in that league. They're no longer in it. And the team that joined it recently is Stephen F. Austin, who I love because, Mick, as you know, Debbie Humphreys has coached there since I was at Oklahoma as an assistant. She's been an incredible college coach there, Stephen F. Austin. They jump into that league. They're undefeated. Grand Canyon is in 2nd, and UT Rio Grande Valley is in 3rd. And they do have a conference tournament. So I think and Stephen F. is sitting at 42 RPI. So they're kind of a bubble team if they don't win that conference tournament. But I hope they get in because I love Debbie and I want to see her do real well. So that wraps up those 5 conferences for me.
Now we can go to Bob.
Okay. Well, actually, I have probably the most round one conferences, but I'm going to put them all together because I do have two that might go into our second round. But as Tom did, I'm going to go ahead and cover all of them because these are all mainly minor conferences that are only going to get probably one team in, with the exception of the two that I'll talk about. I'm going to first go to America East Conference. Right now, UMBC is leading that conference. Their last two matches are at home, so that gives them a little of a home court advantage. They'll probably end up 8-2 in the conference, and probably will be seeded first in their conference, and they'll actually get to host their tournament. So they have a tournament. Their automatic qualifier is going to come out of that tournament, and it kind of looks like it'll be UMBC. Now, the next conference I had was the Atlantic 10, and that's one of the two conferences that may have an interesting situation. Right now, Dayton is number one. They're 16-0, 27-2 overall, and with a pretty high RPI. But they have a tournament. And of course, I've lived through that tournament a number of times. Anything can happen. If Dayton doesn't win the A10, they probably would be the first time that I can remember that there'll be a team coming from the A10. But most likely they'll win the tournament because they're going to be seeded number one. Dayton does play VCU, which is a third place team in the conference right now, 2 times this weekend at VCU. So if they win out, that's probably going to look good for them hosting the tournament, and then they probably win it hosting it at home. Loyola Chicago will win their last 2 matches. They have URI at home. Most likely they're going to win those 2. So I'd probably say it's going to be Dayton for the A10 qualifier. But there is a chance. I think the one team that might be able to upset them is probably Loyola of Chicago. And if that happens, I think Dayton still gets in, which is going to really throw a monkey wrench in everything else. And the same thing happens in the next conference I have, the Big East. Right now, Creighton's 12-2 in the Big East, with St. John's at 12-2 and Marquette at 12-2. St. John's and Creighton are playing this weekend at St. John's. That'll be an interesting match. But either way, the Big East tournament is slated for Marquette. So if there's a chance for an upset in one of these conferences, it looks like it could happen with Marquette hosting at home and Creighton having to go there. So that would change things because that would get 2 teams out of the Big East, because Creighton has a good enough RPI that the committee would have to seriously consider them if they're not the Big East champion. The Ivy League looks like Yale all the way. They're 12-0. They're going to host at home. The only team that might be able to give them a run for the money is Princeton. But I would say the one team coming out of the Ivy League is going to be Yale, and that's going to be their automatic qualifier. NAAC right now is also a one-team conference going into the NCAAs. It's going to be whoever wins their tournament. Right now, Fairfield is 14-2, probably going to end up 16-2, though they did split with Quinnipiac, but they're hosting the tournament. So I'd probably give the nod to Fairfield to come out from the MAAC. Next one I have is Mid-Eastern Atlantic Conference. Compton State right now will probably end up 13-1. Again, this is probably a one-team conference with their automatic qualifier. Actually the difference here is this one's going to be hosted at Delaware State. So it's Compton and Howard most likely going to be in the finals. And one of those two teams will be the automatic qualifier for the Mideast Atlantic Conference. NEC, this conference is probably going to be the team that comes out of this conference is probably going to be the team playing the number 1 seed in the country. All these teams have multiple wins and losses. FDU right now, Fairleigh Dickinson is 10-2 in conference, and they won their last 8 matches, and they're probably going to win their last couple of matches. The only team that seems to be giving them a run for their money is Sacred Heart. I'd probably say FDU will probably come out of that conference as well, but it's only going to be one team coming out of that conference, probably playing the top team in the country in the first round. Last conference I had to talk about was the Patriot League. Again, another one-team conference. Colgate is leading that conference right now, and they have Lafayette at home this weekend, so they'll probably finish up 14-3 on the conference. West Point's playing Navy this weekend. Anything can happen there, but probably whoever wins that match, they don't really care about the NCAA tournament. They just want to win that match. So I think Bucknell might be the only one that'll challenge Colgate. Colgate's going to end up hosting at home, and most likely with that home court advantage will be the automatic qualifier out of the Patriot League. And that pretty much finishes up all my teams. And now I can sit back and just listen to you guys haggle about these Power 5 teams.
So let me jump in here with the ACC, because I think the ACC's outside of the Big Ten. I think the ACC is the most interesting this year. SEC, ACC, and the Big Ten are the most interesting to discuss. In the ACC, we're looking at probably 8 teams getting in with an outside race car chance for Clemson, but 8 because they're 5 through 45 in RPI in the ACC. And just to look into the future, the ACC adds Stanford and Oregon next year. So look for the ACC to be our new dominant conference for the upcoming years if they can maintain. So let's look at this year. You got Louisville in first place with an RPI of 4 in one and 5 in the other. Pitt's at 6. Georgia Tech is at 13. Florida State at 27. Wake Forest 39. Miami 40. North Carolina State at 43 and Duke at 45. But the really interesting part about the ACC is their last 4 matches for the top 4 teams. Louisville plays Georgia Tech and Pitt. Pitt, the second place team, plays Georgia Tech, Louisville, and Miami. Georgia Tech plays Pitt, Miami, and Louisville. And Florida State plays Georgia Tech, Louisville, and Miami. So this is essentially a round-robin tournament for first place in the ACC. And potentially for Pitt and Louisville, it's a chance to host all the way to the regional finals. Does anybody see it any different for the ACC? Chime in, boys.
Is there a way? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mick.
Is there a way that in these last matches, teams at the bottom could really jettison up by beating teams in the middle of that group that you mentioned? Like the people in the 40s could be on the bubble if they lose, and that could reduce the number of teams for the ACC, it seems to me. But if they win, it could really push things forward.
Well, what's interesting that you just said, Mick, is this. The top 4 teams, their conference records are 12-2. So there's 4 teams at 12-2. The next 4 are all between 8 and 6. So you've got 4 teams.
We don't care about where they are in the conference standings.
No, well, let me finish. Let me finish.
Okay.
the top 4 are playing each other the last 2 weeks, and the bottom 4 are playing each other the last 2 weeks.
So that's not good for the bottom 4. They
Exactly.
yeah.
The only team that the bottom 4 are playing is one of them is playing Miami and one of them is playing Georgia Tech. But the rest of them, they're just playing each other. So you've got the top 4 playing each other. You got the bottom 4 playing each other with one little crossover, not enough to make a difference. So I think that pretty much everybody holds their position, and Louisville and Pitt with the most to lose, because Louisville and Pitt are in the hunt for a top 4 seed. And if either one of them goes 1-4, they're done. Even 2-2, I think they don't get a top 4 seed.
Is there a scenario where those guys could both host regionals?
Now that's an interesting question. If Pitt and Louisville beat Georgia Tech and Florida State, and then Louisville can beat Pitt, then or Pitt can beat Louisville, then there's an actual really good chance that both of them could end up. But the big thing is that you don't want to be the 4th seed, because if you look at the RPI right now, the 4th seed looks like they end up getting Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure being the 4th seed is a good place to be. But then again, I don't think Wisconsin and Nebraska want to be 1-4 either. So I don't know. I don't see what the situation is going to be. And we'd have to talk more about the Big Ten, Jimmy. Who do you think is going to be number 1 out of the Big Ten? And where will they end up on the bracket?
Certainly, if Nebraska wins, Nebraska's going to win out until they play Wisconsin, and then if Nebraska beats Wisconsin, I would think they would be number 1 overall. They'd certainly win the conference. Now, if Wisconsin wins, who knows in terms of where they fall in the food chain. The Big Ten is going to be, I don't know if I use the word interesting. It's from my perspective, it's a disappointing year for the Big Ten. I look at I just use the RPIs, and the Pac-12 has 8 in the top 50. ACC has 9 teams in the top 50. SEC has 8 teams. Big 12 has 7. The Big Ten only has 5. So for those teams, IU, Ohio State, Illinois, I mean, there's still some meat on the bone for those teams. They've got to win against,
I think they're done.
Some teams that are above them, and whether they're capable of that or not, who knows? Because I don't think there's a lot of difference between, actually, from Penn State all the way down. There's not a lot of difference between those teams. So on any given night, but as you guys know, you have to go on somebody else's home court and win matches, and if you don't, especially this year, you're probably not going to get in the tournament. If I'm an Indiana, Illinois, Ohio State, I think Ohio State has to win out to even get above 500. So there's some fences to be climbed for those middle of the pack Big Ten teams, and to me that means, when Mick mentioned earlier about Southeast Conference and Big 12 getting in quite a few teams, I'm going, that sounds reasonable to me, because I'm not sure you can make a case for some of the Big Ten teams.
With that being said, let's jump to the Pac-10 for a second, because I saw yesterday that someone had predicted Oregon to get a top 4 seed. Is that possible?
Yeah, it is possible. I don't know who's got the Pac-10, but Stanford is playing Oregon this week.
Right.
And so if Oregon were to beat Stanford, they would maybe do the same thing that the ACC is doing with Louisville and Georgia Tech and Pitt beating each other up. They're knocking themselves out of hosting the regional by losing to each other. and the Pac-12 could do the same thing. If Oregon upsets Stanford, even though they won't win the conference, Stanford will still win the conference, but Oregon will have a win over Stanford in the latest part of the season. The committee could feasibly move Oregon in, or they could move another ACC team back in.
So let's take this guess, Jimmy, Tom, and everybody who's here. Let's say that Louisville wins out. Let's say that Stanford gets upset by Oregon. Let's say that the top SEC team wins out. Is there a chance that Stanford's not in the top 4? Because
that would be a committee call, because the numbers, no matter if Stanford wins or loses, the numbers say that Stanford's a top 4 team. When you look at kills per set, points per set, you look at their schedule, who they played, you look at all of that body of work, Stanford's probably a top 4 team.
Didn't they lose in Nebraska? Didn't they lose in Nebraska?
They lost at home to Nebraska 3-0.
Right, and now they've lost to Arizona State. So then if they lose to Oregon, is there a chance they're out of the top 4?
There's always a chance, yeah. But I think it opens it up for the ACC unless they beat each other up. That's what I see going on. And I think Jim pointed out the real game that you want to watch, is that the committee's going to watch, is Wisconsin, Nebraska. If Wisconsin wins that, and I think they probably should, because they're playing at home and they've got a little chip on their shoulder from going back into Nebraska and losing after Nebraska made 44 hitting errors in that match and made Terry Pettit turn gray, or grayer, excuse me, Tom. Yeah. I think that there's a real good chance Wisconsin wins this meeting. What I worry about with Stanford is their numbers seem to be going down, and I'm not sure I'm 100% right about that. But they seem to be not producing at the level that they produced in the first 2/3 of the season. And so if the committee does any of that kind of look, they might think that Louisville or Pitt, I don't think Georgia Tech, but Louisville or Pitt has a chance to sneak in there.
Well, and you hit the nail into the coffin there. Georgia Tech plays both Pitt and Louisville, but their RPI is only 13. So if they were to win both of those, all they've done is knock the ACC out of a top 4 seed.
Right, and then that leaves the door open for Oregon if Oregon does happen to upset Stanford.
That's what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And there's theoretically, Stanford and Oregon could both be 3 and 4. But probably not, because Texas is not going to lose to anybody. So they're
Texas
probably
not going to lose.
Yeah.
And I guess, would you call what Nebraska had at Penn State a scare?
Oh yeah, there have been a lot of scares this year.
Yeah.
If we look at the times of Dayton up 2 on Louisville. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've had a lot of scares like that, right?
Yeah, it's the Big Ten, and to me, it's like, Wisconsin. We've been talking about Wisconsin and Nebraska as the top 2 teams all year long. But if it's true that the Big Ten is not as good of a league as those other, 3 conferences, does that mean that there's a chance of those 2 getting upset in the tournament?
I think there's a good chance of that, but I think there's a better chance of Nebraska getting upset. Nebraska does not score as much as the other teams.
Yeah.
Their point production is less than all the other teams, but their defense is what they've been living off of. They play some outrageous defense, both at the net and in the backcourt. So that's one of the things that you have to take into consideration a little bit. But I think Nebraska has a good chance of getting beat in the tournament.
I'm not sure it's a good chance, but
Cook will be on the phone. Oh, John, sorry, I didn't mean to do it.
But there's a chance. There's a chance, because when I look at both Nebraska and Wisconsin, like over the long haul, I see Wisconsin's highs and lows being very close together. and I see Nebraska's highs and lows being high and low. I mean, they lose sets to teams that they just shouldn't be losing to. Now maybe that's freshman inexperience, or whatever the reason, but you know how it goes when it's just you only have to play them once, you only have to beat them once, and if they're on kind of a not playing their best, I think there's a lot of teams that could beat Nebraska. I wouldn't say the same thing about Wisconsin, because they play good or they play really good. I don't see them play less than good very much at all. So if you're going to beat Wisconsin, you have to play better than they're playing when they're playing probably pretty good.
So can I throw some numbers in here for you guys, because you're talking about this? Here's some great numbers. Nebraska's production as a team is about 17.8 points per set. They only allow their opponents 12.6 points per set, and the differential is 5.2. Wisconsin's differential, they score 19 points per set, which is a point plus over Nebraska. They give up a little bit more to the opponents, 13.3, and their differential is 5.7, which is not as good a differential as Nebraska. And then you look at Stanford, they're scoring, believe this or not, 20.1 points per set. Now, think about that. If they score 20 points per set against you, you can't make 5 errors, You're in trouble, and that's pretty amazing. But they give up more points than the other two. They give up 14.2, but their differential is 5.99. They have the best differential until you get to Oregon. And here's to throw Oregon in the mix, because you talked about this. Oregon's scoring 20.1 points per set, same as Stanford. Their differential is only 13.6. I'm sorry, their opponents are only scoring at 13.6, and the differential is 6.55. Oregon has the best differential of any team in the tournament. I don't know what that means, but it certainly is interesting to match those things up with the teams that we're talking about.
It means if you have a choice, don't play any of those teams.
Well, if you have a choice, you play Texas. And I'll tell you why. Texas is only scoring 18.6 points per set. They give up more than anybody else, 15.6, and their differential is only 3. And that's very important to me, to see that they're playing people a lot closer than the other 3 teams.
What about Louisville and Pitt?
Well, Louisville is scoring not high at all. That's why I don't think they can win. They're only scoring 13.3 points per set. They give up to the opponents score 13.5 against them, which is right there with Nebraska and everybody else. So Louisville's defense is good. Their differential is 3.8. It's just a little bit better than Texas's. And who'd you ask me about? Pitt. Pitt has trouble scoring. Listen, Pitt is a team, they have to really come of age here late if they're going to get into the top 4. They only score 17 points per set. They give up 14. They have the lowest differential at 2.8.
So we've talked all these numbers, guys. Tell me, who haven't we talked about that can win 6 matches in a row, that has the talent to do that, but we're not talking about? Florida, Georgia Tech, Arkansas,
Washington
State. Yeah. Washington State is the team that if they get hot and get a chip on their shoulder, they produce 18.5 points per set. They give up 15, and again, it's their defense that really makes them have problems. Their differential is only 3.7, but they have the firepower to do it. And I could go back and say one other thing about Oregon. If you remember a couple of years ago, Oregon took apart, I think, Minnesota and a bunch of other teams that were in the top 3 or 4 in the tournament by running middle. And their 2 middles this year, Beeson and McGee, are beasts. I mean, they're literally beasts. They may be the best 2 middles in the country. And of course, hello, John. I'm sorry, it's not the 2 Nebraska kids, but the Oregon middles are really good, folks. And
They have outstanding setting, I think, too. At Oregon,
Pukas is very good to transfer from Washington State.
Yeah.
So that's kind of something to think about.
Well, and I think, and I don't have these numbers in front of me because I don't know everybody, but from watching and checking, because of what my job is, Oregon and Washington State, I think, have two of the oldest teams. The largest numbers of juniors, seniors, and graduate students in their starting lineup, which I think goes a long way when you get to these important tournaments, high-pressure tournaments.
And Washington State has a lot of international kids, which are kind of old souls, if you know what I mean. So they know how to win at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to say it, but thank God they haven't had their mamas at junior tournaments protecting them all these years.
So can I throw one at you that you haven't talked about? Let me just throw this one in. There's two things about the Big East. Who had the Big East? Bob? You had the Big East? I don't remember. But the Big East.
Yes.
Yeah, the Big East has a chance to get 3 teams in. You know, St. John's is at 46.
Yep.
And Creighton and Marquette are going to play again. But Creighton, look at these numbers. When Creighton is good, and that's with Sis, the left side in there with Martin, I believe, the 2 left sides, they have 2 outside hitters that are as good as anybody's in the country right now. And Creighton scores 20 points per set. 20 points, even with the injuries they've had. Their opponents only score 13.7. They are also in the 6.3 differential category, along with Oregon. In fact, they and Oregon and Dayton are the only ones that have differentials of 6 or better. And so you could say something about the conference, but if St. John's is at 46 and they're going to play Marquette, or did you say Marquette or Creighton this weekend, that their RPI is going to go up playing those teams.
Well, we're in an interesting place of the season. There's only 3 weeks left, and for some teams, only 2 weeks left. At some point here, we're going to come on this show, and we're all going to pick our Final Four, and you're going to have to stick to it. You're going to have to own it. I said it here first. With that, I want to thank Jim Stone, my own MIVA opponent. I want to Tom Hilbert, my co-interviewer at Kansas State University. Mick Haley, he coached against me, and he was the first coach to coach me when I was on the U.S. team with Jim Stone. Jim Stone and I played under Mick, U.S. team. Bob Bertucci, you old Tennessee Mountaineer. Nice to see you again here today, my friend. Everybody, come back and see us here at the Master Coaches next Wednesday. Goodbye.